Well, good morning, everyone. We are continuing. The end is near. We're on lesson 9, hide us from the wrath of the Lamb. So we're going to be continuing to look at the future through God's revelation in his book of Apocalypse or Revelation. God has predetermined the end, and he was nice enough to let us know a great deal about it. So just a very quick review. I know I'm not here every week, so just a quick review. The next prophetic event to happen will be the forceful snatching away of all believers from the earth, dead and alive. That's called the rapture. Could happen at any time. There's nothing that I know of that needs to happen prophetically before this event. It could happen at this moment. Let's just see if it happens. Guess I'll have to do the rest of this sermon. After the rapture, the 7-year tribulation with the 7-seal judgment starts. The first 4 are represented by the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: the Antichrist, murder, war, famine, and hyperinflation, the death of a quarter of the world's population. Initially, there'll be no Christians after the rapture on the earth, but there will be a massive number of people that believe after the rapture and amongst the chaos that follows. The Antichrist will persecute Christians to the point of death, and we have the 5th seal is open to reveal the cries of the martyred believers for judgment and vengeance, to which they are told by God to wait a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and brothers who were to be killed as they had been, was completed. Now, if you don't want to be a part of the tribulation, persecution, and murder, believe Jesus now. Truly entrust your life with genuine faith into the hands of the one who created everything. And that brings us to the next event, the opening of the 6th seal. Now, some people put the 6th seal at the end of the beginning tribulation, the first half of that. Some people put it at the beginning of the Great Tribulation, because this judgment is all relating to what God does. The other judgments have some people involved in that. Either way, you don't want to be in it. We talked in an earlier message about the difficulty that John must have had trying to describe what God revealed to him, right? This was 2,000 years ago. He hadn't seen an airplane, hadn't seen a telephone, hadn't seen a computer, didn't see rockets or nuclear bombs. In fact, you guys realize that the first bicycle was created in the 1800s? And that's not long ago. So what John saw, and he tried to write about, I'm not 100% sure, but judging by the reactions in the book of Revelation, we know that it's awful and cataclysmic. So Revelation 6:12 talks about, I watched as he opened the 6th seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red. And the stars in the skies fell to earth as late figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. The sky receded like a scroll rolling up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. When the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and every slave and every free man hid in caves and among the rocks of the mountains, they called to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come. Who can stand? Now, I can't imagine anybody teaching this passage with a sense of glee. It's horrible, and some of us may even have family members who will be going through this. So I will repeat something that I've said at least a few times before, and that is, do not confuse God's patience for God's permission. Do not confuse God's patience for God's permission. Just because God is patient or withholds his righteous judgment against a sinful behavior in our own lives or in society as a whole, do not assume that that means that God approves of that sin. And even, in fact, letting go of the leash, as I say, I don't know if you have a dog and he always pulls on it, letting go of the leash can be a judgment from God in and of itself. When a society just says, I want to do this, I want to do this, and it says, in fact, in Romans 1, that God gave them over to the sinful desires of their hearts. And that's like letting go of a leash that a dog keeps pulling on. And that in itself can be a judgment. But even that is temporary. In Romans 2:1, it says, therefore you have no excuse, you who pass judgment on someone else. For at whatever point you judge another, you're condemning yourself, because you who pass judgment do the same things. Now we know that God's judgment against those who do such things is based on truth. So when you, a mere human being, pass judgment on them, and yet you do the same things, do you think you will escape God's judgment? Or do you show contempt for the riches of his kindness, forbearance, and patience, not realizing that God's kindness is intended to lead you to repentance? So these are the type of people that confuse God's patience for God's permission. But in verse 5 we continue, but because of your stubbornness and your unrepentant heart, you are storing up wrath against yourself for the day of God's wrath, when his righteous judgment will be revealed. God will repay each person according to what they have done. Now, I personally thank God for his patience and for his kindness in the midst of all my sin and rebellion when I grew up, and even afterwards. Now, a lot of people say a lot of things about this seal, this sixth seal that gets open. Some people have made it a total allegory or like a metaphor or something. Thought the rapture was here, baby. Thought the rapture was here. I don't think it's an allegory or an analogy, and we know from the book of Revelation chapter 8 that there's going to be additional physical disasters on this earth. And in 2 Peter 3:10, God writes that the heavens will disappear with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything done in it will be laid bare. And of course, in Revelation 21:1 and 2, John writes, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. So this earth in its current form, God can use it for whatever he wants to. First of all, because he's God and it's his. But second of all, because this earth is going to be going away. So he doesn't need to keep it around or keep it in its present form for anything, for any long period of time. And based on some other passages in Scripture, I believe that in the opening of the sixth seal, that God is going to be physically moving the heavens and the earth. And I believe he's going to be doing that, one, because God does everything for his own glory. Right? Everything that God does reveals his glory. And the second thing I think he's going to do is he's going to use what's coming in this seal to wake up some people. Some people are sound asleep, and they need to be violently woken up, in addition to pouring out his wrath as a righteous judgment. Now, God does several things in the sixth seal. So the opening bracket in this verse is that there's going to be a great earthquake, a megaquake. And then the closing bracket in here describes that as well, is that every mountain and island was removed from its place. Now, with the exception of 7 years in China that I spent, I've lived in the Bay Area for my whole life, so almost 50-something years. And I felt many mild and medium tremors that the earth likes to do in this place. But I can vividly remember the 1989 Bay Area quake, the Loma Prieta quake. Is anybody in that? Were you in the middle of that? That was kind of crazy. I was standing with my dad in his kitchen, and I was facing the windows, and there was the fence on the outside of the house. And it started like a lot of other tremors, like, oh, there's a bump, oh, another earthquake. But that soon gave way to the realize that it wasn't just another earthquake. It was something a lot bigger. And the ground kept moving, and I saw the windows and the fence go like this. And I'm like, that's not supposed to be what's happening right now. It's not just a tremor, like the fence and both things are fixed. The house is fixed and the fence is fixed. They shouldn't be moving opposite of one another. If you remember, it started at 5:04 p.m. and was being broadcast live because of what? Do you guys remember? It was the baseball game between the A's and the San Francisco Giants. So it was the Battle of the Bay. And it was actually the pregame warm-up for that, and it was being broadcast live when the earthquake hit. And as the feed went fuzzy and then the audio started to cut out, Al Michaels blurted out, "I tell you what, we're having an earth," and then the national feed died. So did anybody remember that? Were you guys watching that on TV? It was crazy. The whole country, because everybody's watching the World Series, the whole country held its breath, wondering if San Francisco fell into the ocean. But the answer to that question was, no, not yet. The earthquake lasted 15 terrifying seconds, and it registered 6.9 on the Richter scale. The next live shots were of the elevated double-decker Cypress freeway structure that I had been on many times. I don't know if you drove on this, you knew it was so old. It's like in between the posts, it had started to sag. So you'd go and it'd go vroom, vroom, vroom as you're driving on this thing. And as soon as they said that, I could have been pancaked into that. 2 levels, slammed, some of it all the way to the ground. So this is actually 2 levels right here. So this whole thing, and it caught some cars in there. Now, by God's grace, a lot of people had already gotten off work early, had either gone to the game or had gone home to watch the beginning of the game, because this is actually a major artery to San Francisco. So there were relatively few people on it at the time. The other thing you had was the upper deck of the Bay Bridge that fell down onto the bottom deck. You had the Marina District where liquefaction caused the collapse of buildings and a lot of subsequent fires. Now, the San Andreas Fault that runs up through the peninsula is where the North American tectonic plate meets the Pacific plate. And as these plates move against one another, or one moves and the other stays put, it builds up pressure in there till finally the pressure overrides the friction, and then boom, you have the earthquakes. In some areas, you have one plate that goes, the tectonic plate that goes underneath it, and it lifts up the other plate. So you can create mountains, volcanic activity, and things like that. And I know you may be thinking, John, what's with the geology lessons? I thought this was a Bible lesson. Well, a lot of scientists for the Institute for Creation Research and Answers in Genesis proposed that the last time that we had a major geological event was during the flood in Noah's day. And this would account for a massive shift in tectonic plates and the deep ocean trenches where everything kind of moved at the same time, and then the whole earth flooded. Now, the Himalayan mountains are some of the tallest in the world, and they found seashells and sea animals on top of the Himalayan mountains, which would make sense if there was a global flood, the plate shifted, and it got pushed up. Now, there's a lot of actually secular non-Christian scientists that believe in the tectonic plates and believe that they shifted and believe that they've uplifted. They just believe that it happened over millions and billions of years. By the way, the time that I lived in China, there was an even bigger earthquake in Sichuan province, registering 7.9 instead of 6.9. It was a full point higher. Now, on the Richter scale, that means that 1 point higher is 10 times more powerful. The quake lasted for 120 seconds instead of 15 seconds. Now, when I was in China, I lived far away from there. But some people from our house church, we had somebody that lived in Sichuan, and so we had a couple people went up there to help with some relief effort. And we drove into the area, and miles away, you could start to see cracks, and then worse, and then building collapse. To be honest, I've never seen anything like that in my life. For miles and miles, there was just devastation. Officially, the deaths were 70,000. And $150 billion in damages. The thing about earthquakes is they take your basic foundational truth, is that the ground is solid and stable. And it interrupts that. It smashes this idea that everything, at least, the wind blows. We kind of get that idea. Storms come, and the rain comes. We can even predict landslides. If it rains too much, we say, oh, there's going to be some landslides. There's going to be some floodings. We kind of get that, right? And at least we get a little bit of warning. But earthquakes, they happen in an instant. There's no warning. Supposedly now they can give you a warning now. It's like 2 seconds out on your phone and pops up, earthquake, and then like it happens. You're like, I didn't even get to read my phone yet. So the earthquake is by nature is quite disconcerting because the one thing that we take as stable is the ground. So the earthquake in Revelation 6:12 will break the Richter scale, and it's going to be worldwide to the point that every mountain and island will be removed from its place. And in the midst of that, the sun turns black, the moon turns blood red, and the stars in the sky fall to earth as late figs drop in a strong wind, which means a lot. When the wind blows, you see everything falls down. It's a great day for the sermon. So if we had figs out there and it was blowing out now, all the figs would be falling to the ground in a short period of time. Now, I can only speculate what happens. It could be that the tectonic plates trigger volcanic activity in multiple places, sending masses of ash into the sky and blocking out the sun, turning it black. That could be what it means. We know that that's happened in the past. We've actually seen some from Mount St. Helens. People, you couldn't see the sky. You couldn't see the sun at all. It could be, we know that we already have blood moons. I don't know if you're photography people, you get some really good pictures of a blood moon. That already happens during a total lunar eclipse. The word says stars falling from the sky. You're like, okay, well, that may be a little bit extreme. Well, the Greek word for star is aster, and we get our word asteroid from it. So an aster or an asteroid is a large chunk of rocks in space. And when a large asteroid breaks into smaller pieces, we call them meteoroids. And when those meteoroids come into the Earth's atmosphere, we get what? We get meteor showers. And sometimes we call these things what? Shooting stars. Right? So they are. So if you had this example coming in here to where you had, it looked like stars that come down from the sky. Now, NASA says that most space rocks smaller than a football field will break apart in the Earth's atmosphere. Traveling at tens of thousands of miles an hour, the object disintegrates as pressure exceeds the strength of the object, resulting in a bright flare. Now, what's your first question after what I just read? The first question I would ask is, space rocks smaller than a football field? Do you know how big a football field is? So space rocks smaller than a football field will break up. My first question is, what about space rocks larger than a football field, traveling at tens of thousands of miles per hour? That would be apocalyptic, wouldn't it? In fact, we actually don't have to speculate that much because there's a crater impact in Arizona that measures 3/4 of a mile across and 600 feet deep. NASA estimates that maybe this object, by the time it hit the Earth, was 100 to 175 feet across and big enough to excavate 175 million metric tons of rocks, throwing it in all directions. Now, do you see that little green circle over there? I don't know if you can see that. Inside of there, those are buildings. It's actually the visitor center that's in there. It's the Space Museum and Discovery Center. So you can tell by the scale that there's a little road you can kind of see going up from the top, and those are actually buildings. You can't really see them, but you can see the scale of what that looks like. Now, a meteor of this size hitting a city would be devastating, but this is a small one. They say that the biggest meteor crater is in Vredrefort, which I probably mispronounced, so anybody from South Africa, you can correct me. This is in South Africa. It's originally thought to be 186 miles wide. The last one was 3/4 of a mile wide. This impact is 186 miles wide and miles deep. To put that into perspective, if that was to hit in the Los Angeles basin, it would crater everything from Tijuana, Mexico, San Diego, out past Palm Springs, of course, all of the LA cities, Long Beach, Santa Monica, Anaheim, Irvine, all of that wiped out, all the way up to Santa Barbara, who would probably just have stuff raining down on top of it. To bring that closer to home, if the impact center was in Sacramento, California, it would hit, the actual impact of the rock would hit all the way up, as far up to Chico, all the way out to Lake Tahoe, all of the Marin County, Santa Rosa, and all of the Bay Area, all of the East Bay, all of the peninsula, all the way down to San Jose. Over 17 million acres would have a direct impact. Now, you may have heard several billionaires in the world are currently preparing doomsday bunkers. I don't know if you've heard that news. What do they think is going to happen? Mark Zuckerberg's ranch on Kauai is surrounded by a 6-foot rock wall and encompasses 1,400 acres. His personal estate, one of them, encompasses 1,400 acres, which is, just for reference, it's a little bit smaller than the city of San Lorenzo. This is his private compound. Planning documents obtained by Wired show that the partially completed compound is set to include more than a dozen buildings and at least 30 bedrooms and 30 bathrooms, including 2 standalone mansions. I'm not making a personal comment on Mark Zuckerberg, but the thought comes to mind. Remember the guy in the Bible that says, "What shall I do? I'm going to tear down my barns and build bigger barns." That's a lot of barns, I'm just saying. Zuckerberg plans include a 5,000 square foot underground shelter with its own energy and food supplies. The plan is that the shelter's door will be made of metal and filled with concrete, common in bunkers and bomb shelters. The price tag for this, it's over $270 million. Roughly, it's $250 million for his personal estate. Roughly $250 million, give or take 200 million. Well, Mark, my question would be, is it asteroid proof? How well does it do underwater? No one can build anything that is God proof. But my question is, why would people want to God proof their lives? To build their lives in such a way to keep God out? Of course, maybe a better question is, do we try to God-proof our lives? Do we try to build things into our lives to keep God out? How do we try to hide from God? How do we try to isolate ourselves from God? We're going to put a pin in that and come back to that. This verse in Revelation 6:15, ever since I started teaching through the Bible with my Genesis to Revelation 101 class, this verse jumps out at me. It humbles me. It resigns me to accepting God's plan. And I think it does this especially for me, because that's what I wanted to be when I grew up. I didn't grow up in a Christian household. I wanted to be the king. I wanted to be the prince. I wanted to be the general. I wanted to be the rich. And I wanted to be the mighty. I wanted to be a millionaire by the time I was 21 years old. When I was 22, I started working on my second million. But that's because I gave up on my first million. Just so you don't think I'm that rich, I'm just saying. But not only the powerful and the rich will be affected. I think, go back up one. Yeah. Not only the powerful and the rich will be affected, even the lowest people in the world. The slaves, and just the regular people. Not the generals, but just regular free people. Just regular people. I don't know if there's any generals in here, but, regular people like us. 6:15 shows that there's no discrimination in the final days. Money, power, and influence will mean nothing, nor is poverty or ignorance any excuse. Now, speaking of the wealth gap that we have in this world, there's a lot of injustices in this world. I mean, who could deny that? Unfortunately, the devil has convinced most of humanity to cry out for justice in the universe while at the same time denying the judge of the universe. Many people decry other people's injustice while fully being committed to their own crimes or sin against God. And the unbelieving world is not alone in this. Sometimes we Christians who know the judge are more than happy to blame our spouse, to blame our kids, to blame our parents, to blame our boss, to blame our politicians, all the while ignoring what God has revealed in our own lives. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Maybe when we get that small, still voice of God that comes to our life in many different ways, that God is pointing out that thing in our life, there may be something right now where you think, man, don't talk about my thing, John. I came here just to learn something, not to have my thing pointed out. When God points out that thing, say, I really need to address that in your life right now. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's a verse that you read, maybe it's a sermon that you listened to, and the first thing that comes to mind is, but you don't know my husband, but my wife, but my kids, my boss, but we sound like a motorboat. Right? We go right back to Adam and Eve in the garden. Well, it's that woman that you gave me. Well, it's that snake. Who made that snake anyways? Why didn't my husband get rid of that snake? If we have any sort of relationship with God, then we know what he's saying to us. We try to God-proof certain areas of our life. We build an underground bunker with its own air supply and food supply. Am I right? We try to keep God out of our business. Oh, we let him in certain areas, right? Oh, yeah, sure, I'll give him this much or that much. But when he touches on one spot, we say, well, that area is closed behind that cement-filled metal door. And do you know what happens when we put our sin, that thing that God's trying to address, you know what happens when we put that behind our metal blast door? Well, God either lets that sin remain behind that metal blast door, festering away like an infection, and he lets it sit there behind that door. Or he blasts the door off with as much strength as needed to open that door. Which pain do you prefer? The infection or the door blasting off its hinges? Well, there is another way. We can go a different route, and that's when God says it's time to deal with that sin. It's time to deal with that issue. It's time to deal with that attitude. It's time, John. It's time to deal with that attitude. We can actually open up the door. Unlock it and open the door. That could be an alternative. And you may say, well, that's going to be painful too. Yeah, it could be. That could be true. Antiseptic stings. Am I right? Medicine doesn't taste good. That's why when you eat something bad, you say, man, this tastes like medicine. Because medicine doesn't taste good. Surgery is invasive, and rehab can be a long and painful road. In fact, Hebrews 12:11 says that no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have ignored it, for those who shut it behind the door, no, for those who have been trained by it. Now, I take my precious fin bow on walks regularly. He's trained enough that I don't keep him on a leash unless I'm crossing a main road. He's a dog that I've taken care of since he was a puppy. I feed every day, sometimes Aston feed him. I want to give him some credit. I clean up after him. I play with him. Look at that dirty dog. Come on, man. I give him snacks, dress him up. That's Becca's actually thing. But and I even kiss that beagle right on his little beagle lips. And that may freak some people out. But I love that dog. He's a cutie, isn't he? But there's been several times that he's gotten a thorn or a thistle stuck in his foot. Now, when we're out walking, I can see him limping or favoring his foot that he gets the thorn into. And sometimes he lets out a cry, letting me know that he's hurt. Now, I know, as an adult, I can probably go over there and I can pull it out rather easily and rather quickly before he pounds it all the way into his paw, or he hides it long enough to where it gets infected. So I go over there and I grab his paw, the one that's hurt. And of course, I've taken several thorns out of his paws already. So he knows that it always feels better after I take the thorn out. But do you know what he does when I grab his paw? Well, you tell me what the dog does. And I think that we all know that I'm not talking about my dog anymore. Am I right? I'm talking about you and me. That's supposed to be a mirror where you look back and see yourself in there. Now, my dog might have an excuse for fighting back against me for trying to take this thorn out, because my dog's brain is the size of a walnut. How about you? How about me? Well, John, you don't know my situation. That's true. I don't know your situation. It may be obvious out in public, but I don't know it all the way to the bone. And I didn't create the universe either, just to be clear about that. And I didn't knit you together in your mother's womb. And I, for sure, did not die for your sins. But Jesus did. And he can be trusted with all of you. He can be trusted with all of me. Revelation 6:15, it says, the people during this time, when this earthquake happens, it says, then they hid in the caves among the rocks of the mountains, and they called to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come. Who can stand? People in the tribulation will know what they've done wrong. They will know that God's judgment is at hand. Some people will repent and be saved. Some will try to hide behind that concrete-filled metal door. Philippians 2:9 reminds us, for this reason also God highly exalted Jesus and bestowed on him the name which is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee will bow, those who are in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and that every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. I'm going to end with the book of Job. If you haven't read the book of Job lately, I highly recommend that you read at least the first 3 chapters and the last 5 chapters. If you're taking notes, that's the first chapters, 1, 2, and 3, and then the last 5, which are like 38, 39, 40 in there. God considered Job a blameless and an upright man who feared God and shunned evil. He cared about his family. We would say he prayed for him. He committed animal sacrifices for them, saying perhaps they've sinned. And even after, if you know the story of Job, even after losing all of his children and all of his wealth, this is what it says about Job. At this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in disgust. in disappointment, in disbelief. No, my eye's not too good. What does that say? In worship. After all that, Job fell to the ground in worship and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. Can't say that if it happened to me, I would be that righteous. I pray I would. That's where I'd like to be. That's the target. I certainly don't have the problems of Job. And it says, in all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. Who would charge God with wrongdoing? Nobody in here, right? God, why so long? Why did you allow this? Well, after that, he lost his health and was left with a wife who told him, are you still holding on to your integrity, Job? Curse God and die. Well, Job replied, you're talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? That word foolish is not just like a silly, it's not like a sagwa. It's a person who is morally deficient. You're talking like someone who's you're talking like an unbeliever. You're talking like somebody that doesn't know God. Maybe Job's wife didn't want to see Job in that situation. And she's just saying, end it all, right? Because if you curse God, then he'll strike you dead. That's the best thing I can paint that with. And maybe she was just not a very helpful person. Then after that, his friends come over. They give him some terrible advice for chapter after chapter after chapter, thinking that, and some of their stuff sounds kind of reasonable. We know it's not right because of the end of the book, but for chapter after chapter, they tell him stuff, and he's like, finally he starts defending himself to them. And then God steps back in. Now, keep in mind, this is how God was bragging on Job to Satan at the beginning of the book. The Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There's no one on earth like him. He's blameless, an upright man, a man who fears God and shuns evil. That's how God is bragging to the devil about him. I don't think I kind of want that attention in heaven, to be honest. Right? I'm not sure I would be able to handle what Job did. I'd like to be. That's my goal. That should be your goal, right? We don't hope for the worst, but we hope we would stand up as Job did. God is for Job. Do we get that? God is happy to know Job, but not at the expense of his own nature, because some of the things that Job started to say weren't right. After suffering the loss of his family, his wealth, and his wife telling him to curse God and die, and then suffering the foolishness of his friends, God says this to Job. In 40 verse 1, the Lord said to Job, he says to Job, will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who accuses God answer him. This is the same thing as it does to me, the same thing as the book of Revelation. Ultimately, this is what God says. Will the one who fights, will one who contends with God, will the one who says, God, you shouldn't have done this, will they correct that? Will you go to God and correct God? Okay. Here's the response. Let him who accuses God answer him. Then Job answered the Lord, I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I will say no more. Standing before God is always a humbling. If we're not humbled in our life, it's because we haven't stood before God. We don't know God as God needs to be known. Every time you see in the Bible that people see a clear picture of God, they're always humble. Peter in the boat, when God produces all those fish, it's just fish. But what Peter saw was the power of God where they couldn't do anything. And then God just does it like that. And Peter says, go away from me, for I'm a sinful man. Job says, I'm unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. Once I spoke, but I have no answer. Twice, but I will say no more. Good. Job has the right place. It's all done and over. Is it? You read it. You probably know it's not done yet. Then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. Brace yourself like a man. Can I just say it to you guys personally today? If you have a problem with God, if you have an attitude of God, if you're correcting God, how things should be in your life, can I just tell you, brace yourself like a man? You say, well, I'm a woman. Well, I'll say, brace yourself like a man. Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me, what God says. Would you discredit my justice? Would you condemn me to justify yourself? Have you ever been in a position to where you say, well, God, you did this, or you gave me this, or you didn't give me this? You discredit God to justify yourself? Well, you don't know my situation. The reason I sinned, the reason I said this to someone else, the reason I stole, the reason I shaded the truth was because you didn't come through for me. You promised me that I would have a great job, a great life, a great marriage. Where? What? Would you discredit God to justify yourself? So God says, do you have an arm like God? Can your voice be like his? Then adorn yourself with glory and splendor and clothe yourself with honor and majesty. Unleash the fury of your wrath. Look at every proud man and bring him low. So we just talked about an earthquake that will break the Richter scale, remove every mountain and every island from its place. That's God restraining himself. That's God restraining himself. God says, okay, unleash the fury of your wrath. Look at him low. Look. Oh, some of you got some looks. I've got some looks in my life from people. Ooh, you don't look right. But can you be like God? And with just a look, humble every proud man. Look at every proud man and humble him. Crush the wicked where they stand. Out there, one by one, a mass murder, terrible. Nothing compared to what God can do. Bury them all in the dust, shroud their faces in the grave. Then God says, then I will admit to you that your own right hand can save you. Is it done? No, actually it goes on for another 50 more verses. Do you feel sorry for Job? I do, but I don't. God had already touched Job's heart so much and had such a good relationship with him that he bragged about him to Satan. That's how good the relationship was. I'd love to have that relationship, maybe without the devil kind of involved in that. God personally watched Job's life and limited events in Job's life. He was always with him, and he knew Job so well, we can say he knew Job personally and perfectly, that he knew exactly what to say to Job to push Job to an even greater perspective with God. You know, it's not in my script here, but do you remember when God said to Solomon, he says, ask whatever you want, and I'll give it to you? I'd look at that verse, I'm all like, could God say that to me? Could God say that to you? If God said that to you, would you just start taking off things that were not really the best answer? I want a relationship like that. Job had that relationship, and God was with Job during that whole thing. And if you read all the way to the end of the book, his relationship is even better with God. You say, yeah, he got all his stuff back. It's not about the stuff, it's about the relationship. If God is right and justified, speaking to someone he loves, like he spoke to Job, and he is justified, how much more is he justified in his actions against those who hate him and reject him? Let's learn from Job. Let's learn from the book of Revelation. Be humbled before God. You will do it one way or another. You will be humbled one way or another. You will do it willingly, or you will bend that knee unwillingly. You will do it now, or you will do it eventually. And do you know what's better than eventually? Now is better than eventually. Now is better than eventually. Let's pray. God, we thank you for everything you've written and just for your intimate knowledge of us, your infinite care for us, for not letting us believe that we are the center of the universe, that as much as you love us and that you died for us, we're not the center of glory, God. You're the center of glory. Please help us to come to that place where we know that, where we accept that, where we are humble. Please help us to have a relationship. Let us bend the knee to you now, to take whatever problems we have in our lives, with our family, with our job, with our finances, with our health. God, help us to humbly put that before you and accept whatever you would have. We know you love us. We entrust our lives to you. Thank you, Jesus. Amen.